So I want to actually get into your background a little bit.
Ooh.
So, so I'm imagining, 6, 7-year-old Ed Blight in England, kicking the soccer ball around, saying, I am passionate about the over-the-counter metals market in London, and this is where I want to be for the rest of my life. Is that how that went down?
Oh, that couldn't be so further from the truth. No, so I was born in a place called Plymouth in the West Country, which is renowned for being a naval town. So my father, my grandfather all worked in the dockyard, and they worked on the ships, the aircraft carriers and the submarines that were based there. And that's where I grew up. But it was one of those places where you did 2 or 3 things were on the table for you to do. You could go into the dockyard, you could join the Navy, maybe, or you could go into tourism, because the West Country is all about tourism and things like that, or indeed the retail market, none of which really appealed to me. And the Navy didn't appeal to me largely because I did get seasick, so that was one of the reasons I didn't want to do that. But at 16, I joined the Army.
At 16, so you were still in high school?
I left. We had, back then we had O-levels, so I did my O-levels. At that time I got 9 O-levels. And instead of going on to do A-levels in university, back then probably around about 6-7% of people actually did go to university in the UK at that time. And that's how old I am. But so I joined the Army. I was what was called a telecommunications mechanic, which is kind of a high-end sort of term for telephone engineer. I used to do lots of communications installations on RAF stations around the world. And I did that for a bit, but the Army knew that I'd had all these O-levels and things like that. And in 85, I was approached if I wanted to go to Sandhurst for commissioning. And which I went through the process. I passed RCB, the Regular Commissions Board, in 1986, and I started at Sandhurst in 1987. I was commissioned into the Royal Corps of Transport, deployed to Desert Storm, which was a rather interesting experience, in 1990. Came back in the March of 91 after the Land War.
So what was that like?
Intense.
Yeah, what was going on in your mind there? This is your first experience with war.
Well, no, not really. Well, yes and no. So I was serving. So I joined the Army in 1979.
Okay.
And so I was serving in 1982 during the Falklands conflict. But I was on standby. I was based in Germany at a place called RAF Bruggen, and I was on standby to go down and rebuild the communications at Stanley Airport. Had the communications been destroyed, as it was, they weren't. So we weren't needed to deploy. But we were on standby and readiness to go, sort of sleeping with all your kit next to the bed, ready to go and things like that. So that was my first sort of involvement in that kind of thing. But the Gulf War was slightly different. It was the first time we'd ever done armoured conflict for quite some time. We trained a lot for it, which was fine. What was I? I was 28, probably 26, 28, something like that. And I was the operations captain of a bulk fuel transport squadron. And
so you had been moving up the ranks pretty quickly then.
Yeah.
By the time you're 28, being a captain.
Yeah.
Seems significant.
So I did that, and I was. We went out there. I sort of worked with the divisional staff to define what the fuel plan was, how we needed to divide up our trucks for diesel, petrol, aviation fuel, and made sure we were able and equipped and configured to run an advanced to contact armoured warfare. And sort of on the day the land war started, I was queued up in a load of vehicles around about 4 miles back from the front line, watching all the action in front. And then I ended up going through the breach, it was called, just next to a place called Hafar al-Batan. And we paired up. I went through with the US First Armored Division, I think it would have been, the big red one.
I was going to ask about that. So we're like the army's segregated, so you were in a battalion of your fellow English
Yeah.
soldiers, and then right next to you have the Americans, or are you potentially put under the command of Americans and fighting side by side, or how did that work?
It was kind of side by side. So when we first moved up from the coast near a place called Al Jabail, we moved up to Hafar al-Batan, and there was a big spread of forces all over the place, queued up, ready for the land offensive. And the nearest unit to us was a U.S. National Guard unit, and forgive me when I say this, but we spotted them because we saw this plume of smoke going up into the sky, and so our Squadron Sergeant Major took his recce team out to see what that plume of smoke was. Went there, and we discovered that they'd had a problem with their cooking trailer, and so we came back and took one of our cooking trailers across to them and fed them, which was great. We had a great time with them. To be honest, it was really good.
What was the cause? Were they barbecuing and things got out of control?
Well, but basically it was a fuel burner. So as opposed to gas, it was a fuel burner, and a bit like anything, when you put too much fuel in, it sort of burns with smoke, and that's not good when you're cooking. So yeah, we had to. We also drained it down, maintained it, cleaned it up for them, and so they were able to use it going forward. But it was great. No, it was brilliant. Really enjoyed it, and so we were sort of very close. We weren't commanded by Americans. We didn't command Americans. We were just we were side by side all the way through. So I was literally just behind our one UK armoured division going up, but they were side by side with the US 1st Division as well. Going up into Iraq and then across the Wadi and into northern Iraq, which was was quite an intense 100 hours, to be honest.
Now, were you married at this time? Did you have children?
Yeah. I had one daughter at the time.
So was your wife just terrified every day that you were out in the front lines?
I think every time when I asked her at the time, she was it was a difficult time, and the wives dealt with things in different ways. But what tended to happen, particularly the unit I was in was based in Germany, and so it was already relatively quite close-knit for the families, and the families used to there were wives' clubs, and there were various things that would bring the families together. And so there was a network already there to support them. And they came together even more, and we had some people in our rear party that were left behind in the barracks who supported them and made sure there was always something for the families to do. We were lucky. The unit we didn't have any fatalities. We did have some injuries, which was a concern. But we were fortunate enough we didn't have fatalities. I did lose a colleague of mine who used to be in my troop my first ever troop when I was commissioned. He was unfortunately killed. But it was a different experience because it was very fast-paced, very moving, forward-moving. And if you look at the stuff that was going on in Afghanistan, which was much more a patrol base, so you move, you patrol, and you fight from base to base. This was armoured warfare sweeping across the desert, and you were constantly on the move to keep up with the frontline troops to make sure that they were resupplied and they could continue the advance into northern Iraq. Northern Kuwait, sorry, I should say. And but the thing, there's been a lot said about the first Gulf War and then the second time in Iraq and the politics behind it. I mean, I felt comfortable with the mission of the Gulf War because the mission was to liberate Kuwait that had been occupied by the Iraqi forces at that particular time, and we achieved that. The Kuwait was liberated. We were able to stay on, and it's still liberated to this day. And that, I think, was the whole purpose. It was a very clear mission. It was a very clear goal. The end state was very clearly defined. And then when you're operating that clear military mission and you achieve it, then you know you've achieved all the goals. And once you've stabilised the area, you can then withdraw and leave it to the country to settle. And that's what happened in Kuwait. Obviously, Iraq was a slightly different story. It remained unstable, and that led to the second Iraq War.
And were you still in the military during the Second Iraq War? And did you go back over to that theater?
No, so by then, by the time the second, we'd obviously had Bosnia and the Kosovo thing. So I did a tour as a squadron commander in Bosnia. This was more a peace support rather than a peacekeeping mission. So there's different phases of there's peacekeeping, where you're trying to keep the opposing parties apart, and there's peace support, which is they're not fighting anymore, and what you're trying to do is make sure it stays that way. And that's what it was. So we went from I4, which was really the peacekeeping, to S4, the stabilization force, which was more about stabilizing the theatre and making sure that the parties didn't come to fighting again. So I was there at that particular time, and then I was promoted to lieutenant colonel in when was it, 2002, 2003, and a couple of years later I then went out and did a tour as a lieutenant colonel in the Joint Force Command in Naples, commanded by a US 3-star, and that was a good tour. That tour was largely looking after Bosnia and Kosovo, and also Joint Force Command at that time was also looking at Iraq and also operations in Afghanistan. So, and also Black Sea operations as well, which was quite interesting. So there you go.
And any memorable stories from any of those experiences?
There's always memorable. Some of them probably not the kind of story that I could say on something like this, but there's always memorable. I remember, and here's a good thing, because the military is always about balancing sport with military life, because sport is about team ethos and bringing the team together, and the military service requires you to operate and work as a team. So, but when I was in Bosnia, the British ambassador put a note around to the forces and said he wanted to run a cricket competition in Sarajevo, and there'd be a reception in the ambassador's residence afterwards. And we were all told to go around and bring together as many people who could play cricket. So I was part of a team from the Split and Glamoch area in Croatia and Bosnia. So we took a 6-a-side cricket team down to Sarajevo and played cricket in Sarajevo. And we were clearly told that one of the fields behind, if the ball went in there, you left it there because that was still mined. And then the Com S4 is a 3-star US general, turned up with his entourage and security guards. And I was batting with a good friend of mine at the time, who hit this enormous 6, which smacked into the general's car, and then his security detail were diving around all over the place, adopting fire positions, thinking they were under attack. But there we go. It was quite funny.
That's great.
And all I was saying was, good shot, but in a nice way.
You almost started war with the Americans.
That would have been really bad. No, it was good.
So what ultimately led to LBMA? I mean, the transition from military to the world of metals finance and governance is a big transition. I'm assuming you retired at some point from the military?
Yeah, so the last few years, about the last 9 years of my time in the service, I was Lieutenant Colonel. And I did a lot of senior roles in corporate finance. I also did a role working in supply chain optimization, which got me working with a company called Raytheon Systems Limited, where I was doing Lean Six Sigma stuff with them, and we were looking at optimizing the defense supply chain. So
this is Raytheon, the defense contractor, the big
right.
US.
Yeah, did a lot of working with them. And then, so I also then went from there, I moved into corporate finance, where the job was really working with the frontline commands and the permanent joint headquarters to identify all the resources and fund the delivery plan for each of the frontline commands, and then also balance the books on the procurement budget for new equipment. So I did all the base work on things like the new aircraft carriers we've now got and things like that. So there was me and a bunch of other people in the team, but we were all working on those sort of projects, making sure the resources were in place to fund that.
What did you enjoy the most about that work?
I think it was working with the other services, and the team I was in was commanded by a Navy 1-star, and we worked with the other services in our own team, and then you worked with each of the frontline commands, finding out what was important to them, what they needed to do within their formation cycles, so that they could. The Navy was all about rotating the ships through line service, through maintenance, through overhaul, and so on. The Army was all about formations cycles. The Air Force were all about 5-star hotels and flying their aircraft around all over the place. Sorry, that's a dig for the Air Force, but I'm going to do that, aren't I?
So then you transitioned from that role into, do you go directly to LBMA from there? Or is there another stop along the way?
No, so I left the Army in 2010, and I did a short stint doing some consultancy on Lean Six Sigma. And then I joined Amazon, and I headed
Really?
up... Yeah. So I headed up their shoes and apparel business in the UK. And
that's a big jump.
Yeah.
From the military to e-commerce, but it's supply
Lean
chain.
Six Sigma. It's Lean Six Sigma. And Amazon are very big into mini Kaizens and Kaizen, and looking at process improvement, constantly looking at the constraints and bottlenecks on processes and improving them to deliver greater customer service. And so if you take what I was doing with Raytheon and defence inventory optimization, it was the same kind of thing, going in and then looking to improve the output constantly to meet the demands of every, what they call peak season, which is around the Christmas period and the holiday season and so on. And so everything was geared around driving improvement planning, Kaizen events, so that you could deliver the expected outturns that they wanted every year during their peaks. And everything was geared towards improving the way the business delivered every year. And so I did that for a couple of years. They moved the shoes and apparel business to its own fulfillment centre in Rugeley, just outside of Birmingham, and then they wanted to move me on to customer returns in Glasgow, and no thank you very much. I like Scotland. For the Scottish, it might be listening, but
I was about to ask the question.
But my family were down south, so I wanted to be close to them, which was the most important thing to me. So I then moved from there, and I moved to G4S, so in Cash Solutions UK. But I moved across there deliberately because they were in partnership with Deutsche Bank to build a new precious metals vault, and also to integrate it with their clearing systems and allow it to integrate in with their role at that time as a member of the London Precious Metals Clearing.
Did you know anything about vaulting at that time?
Well, I knew a lot about warehousing.
Okay.
And to me, which a lot of people in precious metals vaulting in London would think is heresy, to me, gold bars are just another product that has a certain specification, that needs to be handled in a certain way, it needs to be processed in a certain way, it needs to be stored in a certain way, and you need to be able to move it around in a certain way, which is the same as ammunition, which is the same as food, clothing, or anything else. It's
a warehousing process.
It's a warehousing process. And I took that into the design. And so
why do you think they would think that's heresy?
Well, I moved into it as a newcomer into the vaulting, and vaulting it's kept secret how it's done and where it's done, and how you do it and how they deliver it is a closely guarded secret in each of the vaults. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong, and no one is saying for 1 minute that the London vaults are doing anything wrong, because they're not. They are the guardians of the London market. And they have been doing that for quite some considerable time. Of course, I was a newcomer coming in, and I was introducing things like mobile racking into subterranean vaults that could move 220, 240 tons of metal at the push of a button. And I was introducing a warehouse management system with scanning capability and logging capability, and the ability to transmit data from the moment you weighed or from the moment you stowed the bar in a location straight back to the bank, and then allowing them to forward that information direct to the owners via their Autobahn app. So we designed that process, and everything in it was designed in the way that Amazon would run a warehouse. But it was all done with Lean Six Sigma. So